Have you ever sat there wondering which cards you should be crafting first? Well, I'm here to answer that question for you. What's going on, guys? Welcome to this episode of Head-to-Head Battles. My name is Susu, and I'm going to be telling you the top 10 cards that you should be crafting ASAP. So I asked for some help over on our Twitter, so if you guys want to be a part of the next video, go follow us on Twitter, and without further ado, let's get straight into the video. Alright, so if you guys look over on the screen right now, you guys see the top 10 cards to craft now. Alright, so first one on the list, and this one's probably the most important, it's Max C. So we're gonna need 3 Max Cs. Let's read this card together. It says, during either player's turn, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard. This turn, each time your opponent special summons a monster, immediately draw 1 card, and you can only use 1 Max C per turn. Now, this card is really good in the format because even if you're playing against Elvic players, which I'm sure you're seeing a lot of, they still need to summon off of Conquistador and Sanguine. So generally, if they use Conquistador, you want to wait until they use Sanguine so you can draw twice instead of 1 time. Now, this card is really good going first or second because there are times when your opponent will summon on your own turn, which will net you a free draw, but generally you want to save it for your opponent's turn so that it just stops their turn like outright before they can make any negates to stop Maxi. And generally, most people are playing Called by the Grave and Crossout Designator as well as Ash, and these are all cards that can stop Maxi. But if Maxi ends up resolving, you're generally winning that game off of card advantage alone. All right, guys. So with your first UR points, I really recommend you to be crafting 3 Maxi URs ASAP. All right, let's move over to the next card. So the next card that you should be crafting is Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. So let's read this card together. It says, when a card or effect is activated that includes any of these effects, quick effect, you can discard this card and negate that effect. So when a player is adding a card from deck to the hand, special summoning from the deck, or sending a card from deck to the graveyard, or more commonly known as Foolish Burial, okay? So Ash Blossom actually stops Max C and a plethora of other cards. Most decks, if they didn't really open that well, could lose to a singular Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. Now, both Maxi and Ash Blossom are cards that can go into any deck, and generally usually are. I highly recommend this as your second target to craft with your next UR points. All right, let's move over to the third card. The next card I really recommend you to craft is Called by the Grave. Now, this is only a 2 of, so you don't really need to spend that many points for it, but let's give this card a read. So this one says, target 1 monster in your opponent's graveyard, banish it, and if you do, until the end of the next turn, its effects are negated, as well as the activated effects and effects on the field of monsters with the same original name. So now the downside is this. If you negate Ash Blossom, you can't use Ash Blossom if you have it next turn. But the upside is that you actually get to play the game, and you generally don't need to use Ash as an interruption on your opponent's turn anyways. Called by at 2 is actually really huge, and this actually also stops Max C. So if you've noticed that you're losing a lot of games to Max C, having Called by the Grave and Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring already give you 5 cards to stop Max C, and that's really, really good because in a 40 card deck, the chances of you opening one of those 5 are insanely high. So this is definitely third on my list. Let's move on to number 4. Okay, so the 4th card on my list is actually Crossout Designator. Let's read this card together and we'll kind of go more in depth on it afterwards. So this card says, it's a quick play spell. Declare 1 card name, banish 1 of that declared card from your main deck, and if you do, negate its effects, as well as the activated effects and effects on the field of cards with the same original name until the end of this turn, and you can only activate 1 Crossout Designator per turn. So this card actually stops any card in the game as long as you yourself are playing that same exact card. So let's say your opponent Max sees you and you open Crossout Designator. You can activate Crossout Designator, declare Max C, banish from your deck, and their Maxi will not resolve. So Crossout Designator is a really, really good card in a format where Maxi is legal. So I highly recommend you to craft this card as well. Because if you really look at it, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cards to deal with Maxi. And granted, all the other cards you're crafting, even though they counter Maxi, they counter every other deck as well. So this is something that you really have to think about, because when you're spending UR or when you're spending real money to play, you want the best bang for your buck, and this is definitely a great start. Okay, guys, so let's move on to card number 5. All right, so the 5th card on my list is a really, really good one because there's only 1 line of text on it. Okay, Upstart Goblin. So this card says, draw one card, then your opponent gains 1,000 life points. So in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, you generally don't really care about your life points. They're more of a resource than surviving, right? I mean, there are definitely moments when you feel like you're in the danger zone, but generally speaking, if your opponent isn't playing any cheese cards like Hinotama or Sparks, your opponent getting 1,000 life points means you're just giving him a little bit more resources to play with if they need to use Solemn Strike or Solemn Judgment or something along those lines. But the draw one is so important for you as a player to net card advantage, right? So generally speaking, Upstart Goblin at 3 means you're playing a 37 card deck, because even if you draw Upstart Goblin, you can activate it to draw another card in your deck, which may end up being a combo piece that you may need, right? There's no reason for you not to be playing Upstart Goblin in a deck where, you need to draw what you need to see as opposed to you searching, right? So generally speaking, Upstart Goblin should definitely be up on the tier list, but I think it's somewhere around the middle. I think the cards that we talked about prior do take a bit more precedence than Upstart Goblin does, but Upstart Goblin is generally just a consistency card, because it makes your deck become a 40 card deck, and it lowers it to a 37 card deck, effectively allowing you to draw into what you need more consistently. All right, guys, so let's move on to the next one. So the next card on my list is going to be Infinite Impermanence. Now, this card is really good because well, let's read it together. It says, target one face-up monster your opponent controls, negate its effects until the end of this turn. Then, if this card was set before activation and is on field at resolution, for the rest of this turn, all other spell and trap effects in this column are negated. If you control no cards, you can activate this from your hand. So what that generally means is turn 0, when your opponent is going first and you're on turn 0, you can activate this card from your hand to negate effects on the field. Now, what's really good about it is, even if you don't and you end up setting it on your own turn, you can effectively set it where your opponent generally plays most of their spell or trap cards, or in a column where there is already a spell or trap card, aka a floodgate, right? You can generally set Infinite Impermanence in the column where IO is, or goes in match, or whatever other floodgates you're playing against, and it will negate that for you next turn so that you have a chance to play. This card is really, really powerful because it serves a lot of purposes, and you can use it from your hand turn 0. So I highly recommend this card as well, and I think it's definitely fitting right where it's supposed to be. But if you agree or disagree with anything that I say today, let me know in the comment section down below, and we can have a little chat about it. But let's move on to the next card. All right, so the next card on my list is actually going to be Lightning Storm. Now, I know we're in a format where it's the best of one and Ellic is everywhere, so Lightning Storm is kind of a must for me, but maybe not a must for you, okay? But let's read this card together. So it's a normal spell. It says, if you control no face-up cards, activate one of these effects. Destroy all attack position monsters your opponent controls, or you can destroy all spell and traps your opponent controls, and you can only activate one Lightning Storm per turn. So why is this good? If your opponent going first doesn't play around Lightning Storm and puts all their monsters in attack mode, it effectively ends up becoming a Raigeki. Or if your opponent sets 5 and passes without having Solemn Judgment or Dark Bribe, you can clear their entire back row, effectively gaining so much more card advantage than your opponent does, right? Most trap decks or most trap interactions are 1-for-1 interactions. So if you Lightning Storm their back row, they don't have those interactions anymore, which means that they don't have that advantage over you anymore. So I highly recommend Lightning Storm. It's a really, really good card, and there are some restrictions, like it's not as good as Harpy's Feather Duster because, you can't control any face-up cards, but most of the time you want to go Lightning Storm first to bait out an interaction anyway. But other than that, I think it's definitely a staple card for you to have in your repertoire for sure. All right, so let's move on to our next card. The next card on my list is going to be Niburu. So let's read what Niburu does. During the main phase, if your opponent normal or special summons 5 or more monsters this turn, quick effect, you can tribute as many face-up monsters on the field as possible. And if you do, special summon this card from your hand and special summon a primal being token to your opponent's side of the field. So generally speaking, if your opponent is playing a combo deck and you are going second, you can drop Niburu on them, and most of the time their combo will end. Now, even if you go first, right? Because a lot of people are playing going first combo decks. Niburu can generally be used as discard fodder, or if you're playing like an invoke deck, it's definitely a light target that you can definitely use and is really good, right? A lot of people will say that Niburu isn't really a good card for you to be crafting simply because you can be playing others, but that's why like it's not really high on the list, but I still think it's really important because all the top decks, all the top combo decks actually hard lose to Niburu, right? You're looking at Virtual World, they generally don't put up negates before they go into VFD, so you can Niburu them after Cloud Castle resolves. Drytron's really lose in Niburu, Phantom Knights lose in Niburu, and all the other combo decks in the upper tiers lose to Niburu. So I highly recommend this card, but let's move on to the next one. Now, this next one is for all you trap players out there who end up going second. Now, Solemn Strike says, when a monster would be special summoned or a monster effect is activated, pay 1500 LP and negate the summoner activation, and if you do, destroy that card. So now, the reason that this card is so much better going second than Solemn Judgment is, and why I recommend Strike over Judgment, is that you can strike the effects of monsters. With Solemn Judgment, you simply cannot do that, right? So, and because this is a counter trap, when monsters try to, when a monster activates their effect and you chain Solemn Strike, they can't chain anything else but another counter trap, which makes it really good. So for, let's say you're playing against Drytron, right? And they have an ultimateness or a perfection with 30 million negates. Those 30 million negates effectively turn into 0 if you chain Solemn Strike to Herald of Perfection or Ultimateness. So I highly recommend you crafting Solemn Strike over Solemn Judgment simply because it's a more proactive and even a more reactive card than Solemn Judgment will be going second. Obviously, going first, Solemn Judgment is effectively slightly better, but even then I feel like strikes take precedence over Solemn Judgment any day of the week. But again, if you disagree, let me know in the comment section down below. Okay, so the last card on my list, and effectively the worst out of the 10, but still necessary, is Triple Tactics Talent. So if you guys do not know what this card does, this is basically 3 banned cards in 1 card. This card says if your opponent has activated a monster effect during your main phase this turn, activate one of these effects. 1, draw 2 cards, so it's essentially Pot of Greed. Another one is take control of 1 monster your opponent controls until the end phase, which is Change of Heart. And the next one is look at your opponent's hand and choose 1 card from it and shuffle it into the deck. I think this is Forceful Sentry. But now, the one downside to this card is this. If your opponent doesn't activate any monster effects, you essentially have a brick in your hand, and you're sitting there like, please hand trap me Zaddy. And sometimes your opponent will most generally likely play around Triple Tactics Talents, but this is definitely one of those cards where when it resolves, it's really powerful. But when it doesn't, it just ends up being discard fodder anyways. That's why I put it so low on my tier list. Now, for Triple Tactics Talents, it can be used going first and second, right? Because going first, if your opponent hand traps you, you can Triple Tactics Talents. Nice and simple, right? Nothing really too much to think about. But when you're going second, the issue with Triple Tactics Talent is this. Let's say your opponent activates a monster effect. The chances of Triple Tactics Talents resolving, if you haven't baited out the rest of the negates on board, it's pretty slim. That's why I put it so low on my tier list, but I still think that this card is extremely valuable, and when it resolves, it is definitely winning you games. Well, rather games that you couldn't have won without this card, right? Because most of the time, if they leave an XCs on the field, you can just take the XCs, go into battle phase, and overlay into your own Zeus, effectively clearing the board and not giving their monster back. Or going first, you can Triple Tactics Talents, look at your opponent's hands, and rip a card that they really need, and put them on a better habit situation for next turn. All right, guys. So that's it for today's video. If you guys want to see part 2, where we're not really talking about staples, but talking about extra deck cards that you should be crafting, let me know by liking this video and commenting down below part 2. All right, guys. So if you made it to the end of the video, all right, and you like content like this, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment. Hit that notification bell to join the squad. And if you guys want to see and interact with me live, head over to twitch.tv/HeadtoHead battles, where you can see me clap some cheeks while I take my own advice. I promise I promise I take my own advice, all right? So I'll hopefully see you guys in part 2. This is Susu from HeadtoHead Battles, signing out.
What's up, guys?
If you haven't subscribed, make sure to click that button right there in the middle.
Also, if you haven't watched that video that YouTube is recommending you, it's probably crazy, alright? Go watch it. This is Susu from HeadtoHead Battles,
HeadtoHead Battles,
signing out.